Okay, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Migration Law Seminar. I'd like to welcome our guest, Ann-Louise Shrapnel, who is a very esteemed migration lawyer. My name is Matthew Endo, and I'm a student at USQ. And I'd also like to introduce Francine Ridley, who helped coordinate this seminar through the USQ Law Society. So what I'd like to do is, I think it's very good. Everyone's already on mute. So thanks for that. And just go ahead and keep your microphones muted. We are recording this so other people can see the recording later and learn more about migration lawyers. So I'm just going to give a very short acknowledgement of First Peoples. I know people are in different areas, so I'm going to make this a very general acknowledgement. So we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways where the University of Southern Queensland is located. Further, we acknowledge the cultural diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and pay respect to elders past, present, and future. We celebrate the continuous living cultures of First Australians and acknowledge the important contributions Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have and continue to make in Australian society. So with that, I would like to pass this on to Anni. You like to be called Anni, right?
Please call me Anni.
Yeah. So if you wouldn't mind giving us a little self-introduction and a little bit of background about yourself, especially the good part about being from USQ.
Sure. First of all, feel free to leave your cameras on. I like when I'm talking to someone as opposed to just a whole bunch of names. So if you do have a camera and you're listening and you're not too shy, just turn it back on. So at least I've got some lovely faces to look at. Okay, so yes, just call me Anni. I graduated from USQ, I think in 2016, maybe. And I always had an interest in refugees. And a lot of people said to me when I was at uni, oh, you'll change your mind. You'll want to do corporate law. You want to go where the money is. Everyone wants to go where the money is. And I always said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I won't. And I never did. I certainly enjoyed other subjects at USQ, but I never changed my interest to any other area of law. I always wanted to work in admin law and migration and work with refugees. So while I was studying, I did a lot of volunteering, for Toowoomba Refugee and Migrant Support and the Dignity Project, which is under the Catholic Diocese. And that was working with refugees and asylum seekers. And then when I finished law, I did my practical legal training at Salvos Legal Humanitarian. And unfortunately, Salvos Legal isn't open anymore. It closed its doors last year due to funding. There was no more funding. And that's really sad because they did a lot of migration work with refugees. So I did my PLT with them and I had the best time and had some great mentors. And after I finished, I was offered a job to apply for a job with them. And so that's where I started out at Salvos Legal. And so working and volunteering there, I think I spent 3 years, nearly 4 years there, first volunteering and doing PLT and then working. And I was only doing humanitarian immigration. So most of that was protection visas and for people who were claiming refugee status here in Australia. And I also did a lot of work with asylum seekers and people who came by boat, which we call the fast track legacy. And they were basically the main cohort that I worked with. So then, but then I took a little bit of an odd turn. I was very happy at Salvos Legal, but I decided to apply for a position as the assistant legal to the deputy president of the AAT. I'm sure you all know what the AAT is, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. I think I saw a name. I think Jason, you also work at the AAT in Brisbane. So I applied for that job and I got it, and I moved to Adelaide, and I worked with the Deputy President Britton Jones for a year. And that was an incredible experience to be working with him. I had a lot to offer as someone who has migration experience, particularly in visa cancellations, and particularly in my area of refugee law, because at the AAT, when people get their visas cancelled, if someone's on a humanitarian visa, we have the issue of non-refoulement. And non-refoulement is an international law principle, which means that Australia shouldn't return anybody to their country of origin if they face torture or death. And so this is a principle that applies when you're going to cancel someone's visa and they're on a humanitarian visa. So I had quite a strong understanding of the principles of non-refoulement and refugee visas and what's involved there. So I did a lot of work with not just the Deputy President, but some senior members and members as well who just had questions on how to navigate that area of law. So I really had a good time there, and finished that contract up at the end of last year. And now I'm back here in Toowoomba, mainly doing humanitarian visas because, of course, we have an unfortunate event that has happened recently in Afghanistan, and lots of lovely Afghani families here in Toowoomba that need assistance. And that's me.
Wow, that is an amazing story. So thank you so much for that, Annie. So if I may get started with kind of, some people in this, on the session are taking admin law, administrative law, and some aren't. So can you tell us what's the process, what's the pathway to becoming a migration lawyer?
Okay. That's an interesting question. I think here at USQ we don't have migration law, so the only kind of sense you get that you might enjoy maybe understanding migration principles is through admin law and international law. Admin law particularly because in admin law you learn about merits review, which of course is the AAT. And you also learn about judicial review. Lots and lots and lots of judicial review cases. If you've been listening to Simon, they are all involving migration matters. Because I guess when you go to the AAT and you have a decision made that's not in your favor, and particularly decisions that are critical to someone's well-being and safety, for example, being returned to a country where they face torture or death. So a lot of asylum seeker matters, refugee matters, and visa cancellation matters. All of these can then go to the federal court or the federal circuit court for judicial review. Now, those that are studying administrative law will be familiar with the difference between a merits review and a judicial review. But for those who haven't quite gotten to admin law yet, so a migration decision is a decision made by a government body. And that decision, that government body has the power to make that decision because that power is enlivened under an act. And in this case, it's the Migration Act. So a delegate of the minister or the minister makes a decision to cancel a visa or refuse a visa or grant a visa. And then that, if that's not in your favor, you can have a merits review at the AAT where they will look at the merits of the case. And by the merits of the case, I mean looking at the facts. If the AAT affirm the decision, for example, they decide that the minister made the correct decision in not granting you a refugee visa, then there's another step you can take, which is judicial review. And judicial review has nothing to do with the facts at all of the case. It's to do with the process of how the decision was made. So looking at, was all the material before the decision maker, was it all taken into account? Did the decision maker maybe take something into account that they weren't supposed to take into account? Was there procedural fairness? Did the applicant receive all the notices they should have received? Did they have time to reply? And I think you know, there's a lot of things here that have to be taken into account to make sure that the decision was made fairly, that there was natural justice, that there was procedural fairness. So then you can go to the federal court or the federal circuit court, depending on where the legislation tells you can go. And you can kind of argue that, you know, this decision, there was an error of law because the decision maker at the AAT or at the department level, they took into account this irrelevant bit of information and they shouldn't have, and that's an error of law. So then the decision, it goes back to the original decision maker. They have to fix that error, and then they make the decision again. And sometimes, certainly at the AAT, you'll see it a lot. This can go back and forth for quite some time. So a lot of visa cancellation matters, you know, this person's visa gets cancelled, they go into detention, it goes to the AAT, the decision gets affirmed, it goes to judicial review, it might even get affirmed there, it then gets appealed, it gets remitted, it goes back to the department back to the AAT then affirm it again, and then it goes back to judicial review, and it just bounces around, and this can take years. And meanwhile, this person is sitting in detention, waiting for an outcome. And then, you know, this can happen 2, 3 times, and then, you know, hopefully at some point the decision might be in the applicant's favor, and they'll be released from detention. But it's a really long process, and it's a long time for someone to sit in detention. So that's kind of how migration and admin law kind of come together. And so if you are doing admin law at uni, look at those cases you're doing and look at them a little differently now, knowing that, you know, that's a migration decision about someone's life.
Wow, thank you very much. I don't want to insult Professor Young, but I think that you've just made, like, how many weeks now? 8 or 9 weeks of admin law.
Oh,
and you just made it just come alive with an absolutely real example. And, you know, when you said
I'm
that
glad.
Some person is sitting in a detention center, and we have to think of what the basis to challenge that decision, that really, to me, that really brings it home. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And please, Matthew, sometimes I talk a little too much and I'll go off track. So please bring me back on if I tend to go a little off topic.
Well, I think that was really kind of like, you know, what sort of courses to take. And can we go back? You were mentioning some things about your volunteer activity.
Yeah.
And I think that you were saying that was kind of the way you got into migration law. Can you tell us more? And also, besides that, maybe other options for students if they want to get involved in it?
Absolutely. Something that I realized was that the concept of saying, like, oh, you know, I work in refugee law, or I'm a humanitarian immigration lawyer. It sounds so nice and flowery, but there are no jobs, and you are up against a whole lot of other people who want to do that same thing, and you can't just kind of apply with no experience and not knowing anything and hope that you'll, you know, get in on your good grades and your personality, because you're up against a lot of people. So my advice is, while you're at uni, you need to start volunteering. You need to start getting that experience. And, you know, while there's no firms in Toowoomba, there's certainly You can volunteer. For example, I give my time to the Dignity Project, which does form filling for offshore humanitarian visas. And that really gives you an understanding of that kind of process. There's also, trams that just generally, volunteer with refugees. In Brisbane, there's RAILS, Refugee and Immigration Legal Services, and they take volunteers and law students. So you really have to kind of network your way in. I didn't know anyone when I started, but I just, I remember when I started, there's a lovely man in Toowoomba called Dr. Mark Copland, and he started Toowoomba Refugee and Migrant Support, and was then the commissioner for the Social Justice Commission of the Catholic Diocese. And I heard that he was doing form filling for asylum seekers, and I basically stalked him. I wouldn't leave him alone. I was like, I'd see him and I'd go up to him and I'd be like, excuse me, Dr. Copeland, my name's Annie, and I'm a law student. And I would get in his face, and I think eventually he was just like, oh God, got to get off my back. And I ended up working for him, and we made a really great team. But I just wanted to get in, and from there, it was really I was able to then I would go to meetings with all the other stakeholders in Brisbane, and I just met everyone, and that's where the senior solicitor at Salvos Legal met me, and she asked me straight away, "Where are you doing your PLT?" And I said, I don't know yet. And she said, "Come do it at Salvos Legal. I'd love to have you." And I was like, done. So you really have to get in there, and you have to give your time for free. And when I finished law school, everyone that I finished with was getting local jobs in their local law firms, and I wasn't. And I was still volunteering. I was washing dogs as well to earn money to pay my rent. And it's 6 months in, and I'm thinking, oh God, what have I done? I've made the wrong decision. And then just when I thought I've done the wrong thing here, Charlotte, who was the senior solicitor at Salvos, rang me, and she said, "I've got funding. I want to hire you. The interview will be next week." And I was like, yes. And that's where it all started. And it's all like persistence and networking and knowing what you want, and really like just digging in and going for it.
So it does sound like there was a lot of perseverance involved in this.
Oh yeah, a lot of backache from washing dogs and working random jobs, and
wow.
I was marking subjects, law subjects. I was doing a little bit of teaching at USQ because I also have a master's in applied linguistics, and I was washing dogs. I was doing all these 3 things and volunteering to like keep my legal knowledge up, and not sleeping very much, and it paid off.
Okay, well, those actually sound like very interesting qualities for students to have in general. Like kind of, these are like these behavioral type of questions that get asked at interviews all the time. Like, you're persistent, you're following through, you're doing things that you might not want to do, so you can keep volunteering. And that's
right.
To me, that sounds like a very important takeaway for the students also in the seminar.
Yeah, absolutely. Don't settle. Like, just go after what you want.
Well, thank you very much.
Just bother people until they say.
So I'm sure there must be some, I might be veering a little bit off topic, but there must be some special technique of doing this, yes?
Of what? Bothering people so
yes,
they say yes.
Persistent.
Oh, I don't know. Just, be polite, but be in their face all the time. Oh, fancy seeing you here again. And just like going to all the meetings and going to all the meetups and the roundtables and messaging people and remembering their names. And, it's exhausting, but it's the way to go. And certainly I've had people that I studied with, who are working in family or commercial law, and we'd meet for coffee and they'd say, "Oh, I just love to do what you do. Like, how can I just kind of, get into it? And I'm like, well, save some money first, because it's a long road. Like, there's no just jumping ship and waltzing on in with your resume. Like, you got to earn it. So you've got to, and then when you tell them that it's not as glamorous as it seems, they're like, oh, maybe I'll go back to my commercial firm. You're like, yeah, bye. We don't have a coffee machine at our work. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm also getting these kind of like life lessons that you're actually telling us as well. And you're telling students, hey, get out there and network and
Yes.
establish your brand.
Yes.
Tell other people who are maybe in the position to think about hiring you, give them your values and kind of portray yourself as not portray, but actually be a hard worker.
Yes.
And
it's really important that I say as well, when I started law, I didn't know any lawyers. I'd never been in a courtroom. All I knew was that I just wanted to do more for humanity. I wanted to help more, and I wanted to do something in migration and international law. I didn't know anyone who was a lawyer. I didn't have any connections. I had no idea. Like, I found out my first subject was torts, and my auntie said to me, "Isn't that a cake?" And I was like, "I think so. I don't know." Like, I knew nothing. So please don't be discouraged when you have your friends waltzing in and they've already been a law clerk for 100 years, or dad's a lawyer or whatever. Like, don't be discouraged. Don't let other people's easy journey disrupt your difficult journey, because on the difficult journey, you learn more lessons and you become a better lawyer.
so that sounds like I kind of hear like my father saying something like that, how that builds character and
yeah, all that. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think we can see the value of the hard yards you've put in, and so I know that you're going to Brussels in the near future, and that's going to be another exciting adventure.
Yes, and I think and that was an adventure that came about purely from networking, and it's also, when I went from being a solicitor to going across to the AAT, it was a little bit of a sidestep. It wasn't a step up. And some people questioned that move. And at times I questioned it. But there were so many things I learned taking that sidestep into a government role and working not as a solicitor, but working as an assistant legal. And, I learned so much about just how the AAT worked. And I'd appeared in the AAT before on citizenship matters. And it was so nice being behind the scenes for a bit and meeting the people and seeing how it works and working with really clever minds like the deputy president. Like, I learned a lot. And it wasn't, so I didn't keep going on that solicitor track. I did take that little sidestep, and it was actually that step that really contributed to me having a better understanding of admin law, and also that made my now soon to be supervisor in Brussels say, the fact that you've now worked for the government and all your refugee law work, you'd be so great for this role. And so that sidestep kind of played a part in me getting this role that I'm going to step into next year in Brussels.
Yeah, while we are talking about taking the next step, do you think being with the immigration department and dealing with government exactly, is it hard? How can you be creative in your job? How you can, like, such you have on a case and you believe in that, but somehow the government did not believe it, or the evidence is not right. But in your gut, you believe this woman or this guy, and they're right, totally right. How you can fight for them?
This is, this is what you deal with every day as an immigration lawyer. So particularly in the case of being a refugee lawyer or humanitarian immigration lawyer, you are constantly, you constantly have a case where someone's life is at risk. And it's really, you really feel that pressure. And something that I love writing, and I love being creative with my writing. And so actually doing refugee claims is something that really suits me, because I love researching the country of origin information. I love like learning about, who's persecuting who, and being creative with my submissions to the department. And very often, and we got used to this, the department will refuse the visa. And then you don't lose hope, you then give it your all at the AAT, because not always, but I've found that, I don't know, I know some people at the that worked for the Department of Immigration who are excellent at their job. But I've also dealt with some people that I have walked out of that interview thinking my client is stuffed, because this person wasn't even listening. They had their own agenda and I'm stuffed. And so you do your best you can, you write the submissions, and then you really aim, like you tell them to expect that refusal, and then you go for the AAT. And often at the AAT, I've found that there is someone there listening who has a very open mind, who is listening to the facts and will give a much fairer outcome. So this is something that you have to deal with every day. And sometimes you get someone from the department who is genuinely open and listening, and sometimes you don't. And there's really nothing you can do about it. And the department as well, they're like a ghost. You've got no one to write to. You've got, no
one would answer.
To give you an example, I had a citizenship matter where a woman was refused her citizenship because they said she was of bad character. And the reason they said that was because on her humanitarian visa, she said that, she tried to get several applications in for a humanitarian visa. And she had indicated that her grandmother was killed in a skirmish when they were trying to flee their village. And she eventually got this visa called a last remaining relative visa, because her other family were in Australia. And the department refused her citizenship and said, you're of bad character because you lied in your application. You weren't the last remaining relative. Your grandmother's still alive. You've been communicating with her. We know she's still alive. You've lied to the department to get your visa. And it was this brutal response. But the thing is, first of all, when I talk to my client, she's like, when there's a skirmish, people just flee. You just expect everyone to be dead, because she didn't see her grandmother for the next 6 years. And she had she just thought she was killed because she ran and behind her was a burning village. But that notwithstanding any of those facts, when you look at a last remaining relative visa, you are eligible for that visa if your mother, your father, or any of your brothers and sisters have left the country and you are the last remaining person in that family unit. So the grandmother was not even part of assessing that visa. Considering that information was actually grounds for judicial review. It was considering irrelevant information. And that matter, so they refused that. That matter took 2 years to eventually resolve at the AAT, when really, it would have been so much easier to just write to someone at the department and say, mate, you've made a mistake, reassess. So, you know, you're dealing with ghosts and you have to be creative and you just have to keep trucking and not get too emotionally involved in it.
My
Yeah,
experience at the AAT is pretty funny with that whole ghost experience. I can relate to that. Even liaising to the multiple departments that I had to talk to,
Yes.
the brick wall that I faced, even though we're technically above the department reviewing their decisions, and the processes involved from a public servant point of view. I have to be very careful. I don't work there anymore, but it's very interesting that you use the term ghost. I can relate to that big time.
Yeah, and certainly, Jason, when I was at the AAT, it was the same thing. You know, all of a sudden, we had punters, so applicants and their lawyers, ringing the AAT saying, the department have moved our client offshore. They've moved them from one detention center to another. And we're at the AAT like, well, we don't have any control over that. So we try to call the department, but there's no one to call. And it's just this, it's amazing. It's like you're trying to communicate with a ghost. So it makes this a very difficult time.
I have a personal experience with them, and it's really, they are really ghosts. And you are lucky if they are emailed you. I have two questions for you actually. First one, do you think culture, or know more about cultures everywhere, and their aspects and their rules that can affect your way to make the case? And the other question, is there any way, like, I'm not talking about only my experience, but in everywhere, like you said, it's taking long time, maybe years. Is there any way to just improve this process, make it maybe not shorter, but more effective? Like they are living in very stressful time that affecting their life, even well-being, and it's very hard for time to live like in a country if they are here in Australia or waiting for a decision. Is there any way to fix this process as a lawyer, as a firm, or as any organization? Like if you are applying for a humanitarian visa, especially that there's many people, like I don't know if in Afghanistan now, they are wishing someone just pick up them like this and fly with them of that country or any country else. But
I think, I mean, I guess I have never worked for the Department of Immigration or the Department of Home Affairs, so I can't comment on how they're set up to make their decisions, you know, how many people they have per area. Because when we consider immigration, you know, we do have to consider there are so many visas, so many subclasses that have to be approved or refused, and so much evidence to be considered. So you know, there's skilled visas, there's humanitarian visas, there's temporary visas, family visas, and that would take a lot of manpower. So, you know, I can understand that this takes a lot of time. And the other thing that's important to remember is when it comes to permanent residency or permanent visas, Australia has to be very careful with who they are giving permanent residency to. So when you are going to consider someone for a permanent residency visa, there needs to be police checks, there needs to be health checks. There's all these things that take a lot of time. And in our humanitarian program, which I can speak to, we can't just see people who are in trouble and just give them all a visa. There has to be those checks. So it's a real balancing act between being efficient and also making sure that those criminal checks, those health checks, all of the, you know, making sure that their story is actually true, and connecting all of those dots before granting a visa, providing them with travel documents even. You know, a lot of people don't have travel documents. All of this takes a lot of time and a lot of resources.
Yeah,
so
that's understandable.
It's certainly a balancing act between being efficient and making sure we've ticked all the boxes. From my experience as a lawyer, sometimes I really can't understand how a visa can take so long to be granted, particularly things like orphan relative visas and last remaining relative visas, child visas. If there's a very good application there, I really don't see how it can take 2, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years to approve someone's family reunion. That is a question for the department.
Yeah, I understand that. The quality of the community is very important. Like from my own, like what I can see in my life here around, I can see many people don't deserve it. Actually, they use this advantage, and that's their smart way to deal with it. But in my opinion, there's more people deserve it, and being a lawyer for immigration, it's hard. It's hard to make your case, and being more in the culture of these people, because some people, they are using stories, fake some stories, because of the culture said this and this can harm your life, or you are maybe you will be killed.
I think
but it's not right.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of how visas are processed. So certainly a refugee visa is a very, that process is under a microscope, and the department has the ability to, they have a fraud department, they have incredible equipment to look at whether documents are fake or not. And not to mention the criteria is a very strict criteria, and our definition for refugee is very narrow. And in my experience, I get a lot of stories. I get a lot of people coming and applying, saying, I help, I'm a refugee and I want to apply for a refugee visa. And I assess them and then realize that I can't help them. And I let them know that I don't think they'll be successful. And then I move on to someone else. It is the more you do this job, you realize that people are terrible liars, because people, you cannot lie about every second of your life and retell that narrative over and over again for 4 years and get it correct every time. And both the department and certainly immigration lawyers are no fools when it comes to incorrect narratives and gaps in narratives and matching facts. So, you know, something that I have heard from a lot of people in communities is like, that person's got a refugee visa and they shouldn't have, because they lied and they don't deserve it. As someone who actually works as a refugee lawyer and turns away a lot of people, I can tell you now that the people that actually get that visa, and there are very few of them, if their story doesn't check out in just the smallest way, they will not get that visa. It's a very hard visa to get, and it takes a lot of time, both as the lawyer and as the decision maker, to go through all that information and quiz that applicant and question that applicant under very tense circumstances to make sure that they are legitimate. And it's not a test of personality. It's not about refugee of the year. It's about your claims. You can be the worst person in the world, but still have strong claims. And the hardest thing is when you have a client who is the loveliest person and does so much for the community and is loved by so many people here, but they just don't have the claims to get a visa. And you have to tell them that unfortunately they're going to be unsuccessful. And it's really important to remember that. It's a refugee visa. It's not a refugee of the year visa.
Hello, Annie. It's Prem here. I'm a USQ student. I live in Sydney, study online. Thank you, Matthew, for arranging this. The one thing that I've just been thinking about is that, unfortunately or fortunately for some, and I think Dr. Young has been kind of letting us know this in some sort of indirect way, is that we're at the mercy of the machine that drives at the very core of immigration, and that's the Act.
Yes.
And we're at the beck and call of having to sort of maneuver around this very big machine.
Yes. And Prem, that's a really, really good point, because it's interesting. This whole immigration is something that everyone in Australia seems to have an opinion on, and yet people know very little about it. And that immigration is completely controlled by the Migration Act, its regulations, and its policy. And all of that is so strict, and there's very, very little room for movement and very little room for flexible interpretation.
That's right. It's like here we've been talking in our admin law about, procedural fairness and intention and, bias. And I'm thinking, oh God, that's just a heavy bag to carry when you're looking at the Migration Act and just trying to think, well, did they really intend to do this way? And it's very hard to really get to the core of that particular act to know really whether or not what their intention was. You can only work with what you've got.
Yes, the Act is incredibly complex, and certainly even for me in matters that I focus on a very limited scope of migration law, and even within that very small scope that I practice in, I still have moments where I have to contact my colleagues and say, how do I've got this situation and I just don't know, like the Act just is silent and the regs are silent and the policy touches on it, but I don't think it actually applies to this particular, matter, like help me. And this happens a lot because the Act is, it's so difficult to understand, and you really have to dig a lot deeper to really get to it. And the fact that it's so complex means that when you get to the AAT or the federal court, even in the AAT, you've got members running around being like, well, I don't know, and like researching the Act and really relying on their solicitors to tell them the law here, because it's just so complicated. And when a decision's made, it's the law. By the time that decision's made, usually there's some new case law, so it comes flying back to you because you've made an error of law because something's changed. And it's an absolute rabbit hole, is what it is.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I'd like to, if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to ask one more question about becoming a migration lawyer, and then we'll kind of open it up to more questions. So Annie, you're mostly dealing with refugee visas. Mm-hmm. How about a student who's interested in more general migration law? Like, let's say they want to become a kind of migration lawyer, not for refugees, but for people who want to get PR or some other type of visa.
Yeah. So of course, I mean, it's such a broad area. You've got skilled visas and like, a whole bunch of temporary visas, which also get quite complicated, and the law changes a lot with these because it's at the mercy of the minister, and at the mercy of instruments that get signed off on how many people we're going to take, or how many visas are going to be distributed this year, or what the in a skilled visa sense, and I'm certainly not the person to ask, but every year there's a whole, they have to assess like, what are the skills in Australia that we need people for? Because that changes constantly. So, 1 year we need physios, and the next time we need nurses, and then we need farmers, and then we need people and we need engineers, and it just changes. So with those changes of Australia comes changes of instruments that then change the laws about who is eligible for what. So I guess if that's something, and I think people who are interested in business and commercial areas of law as well would find that very interesting, because sometimes you can be dealing with huge corporations that Australia brings here to build things like roads and tunnels and bridges and things like that. So in that case, there's quite a few firms in Brisbane, and some of your top tier firms also practice in those areas. Minter Ellison has a migration department. Clayton Utz does as well, and then you've got some others which Fragomen is a huge, I think Fragomen is like the biggest migration firm in the world, and it's everywhere, and it's all skilled. It's all like next level commercial stuff. So that's kind of what you're looking for there. And that's it really. Like you just have to go and try to get in a clerk position and see if it's for you. And then, get a junior solicitor position.
Well, thank you very much, and especially for those firm names for students to research in potentially interested in kind of commercial plus migration. Yes, thank you very much. So let's go ahead and open up to questions. If I think that Jason, did you have a question?
I know earlier I was just going to comment, we're talking about how complex the Migration Act is, and then also vaguely kind of hinting at it keeps evolving, and the arm that the executive and parliament has in those changes as well is something that I guess over the last 7-8 years we've seen quite a lot of changes in policy. I'll kind of just hint upon that, but yeah, I just wanted to comment on, with changes of government, we do see drastic changes in policy. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. Yep. It really does. It really hangs in the balance of who's in power, because certainly at the moment we have new policy in relation to visa cancellations. It's called Direction 90, and it, in my opinion, is brutal. It's not about protecting the community, which is what visa cancellations should be about. It's about punishing people, and that is not the purpose of the Migration Act. And yet those in power currently making policy are trying to create instruments that create laws that punish migrants, whether it be through visa cancellations. They're looking at, or they may have already put it in place, a language, a new language section for a partner visa. It's a family visa. It's about reuniting people with people. There should be no language requirement there. And they are, you know, if you expect some dear thing from, you know, Iran, who has finally found their husband after they went missing and is trying to get them to Australia, and they're supposed to have this concept of the English language, it's completely outside the scope of what the visa is about and the objective of the visa. And this is something that we're seeing more and more. We're seeing this, it's almost, in my opinion, like a pro-Western immigration system. And it's certainly not inclusive for others that are trying to migrate to Australia. And I disagree with it a lot. Any other questions?
Sure. Hi, Annie. It's good to see you again.
Hi.
Oh, by the way, everyone, my name is Hamida, not Farida. I think my sister logged into Zoom for some reason, and I couldn't afford to miss a few seconds and, you know, leave the Zoom room and then come back. So Hamida here. My question for now was, you guys did touch on your journey and position in Brussels, but you didn't say more. Personally, I'm doing the double degree in law and international relations, and I would love to work with the UN in the future. I think FIG would also like to work in the same, would like to be on the same wording side. So
yeah, I think
you're
about to ask the same question I wanted to ask.
I was going to ask, what would your goals specifically be within the United Nations?
You know what, Hamida, I'd love to talk about it. I don't get my contract until January, so I'm probably not in the position to talk too much. However, it is something that I got from simply networking. And then it evolved into them asking me for my resume. And then that, you know, it's kind of just started from there. It snowballed from there. So I can't stress enough the importance of meeting people internationally and just making inroads like that.
So
yes, it is with the UN, and it starts in May next year, and it's for 12 months with an extension, and with the possibility of an extension. And I really look forward to getting my contract in January so I can learn more about it. But I think at the moment I'm not actually at liberty to say some of the things that I'll be doing there.
That's all right. I'll keep an eye on your LinkedIn.
Great, Hamida.
So it does sound like some students already have these networking opportunities and have already reached out. So that's great to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're lucky. I'm Russia, Annie. Maybe we'll meet later.
Absolutely.
Good luck.
Any other questions?
Also, if there isn't any other question from anybody else, I'd like to ask another one. Given your experience with refugees again, because I am one, I arrived in Australia on a humanitarian visa. What is the most important thing you would recommend to remember when dealing with or acting for refugees and asylum seekers?
That's such a good question. I'm going to take that question in a really broad sense, if I may. And this is for everyone. Like, maybe you're not even interested in immigration law, but something that I found a lot was that if someone is on a visa, and particularly a refugee visa, then care has to be taken in all areas of law because of the risk of visa cancellation. So I always say, you know, if some of my friends are in criminal law, I always say to them, please, if someone comes to you and they have a strong accent, please ask them if they're a citizen or if they're on a visa, because what you do in court is going to change. Because if you think, oh, look, there's not much hope here, but don't worry, you'll just get a slap on the wrist if we do this. It might be a slap on the wrist in a criminal law sense, but under the Migration Act, they have a very a broad scope to cancel a visa, even when someone has when there's no criminal record, where it's simply it was a complaint, or you know, something as simple as an assault charge that you know, it was a fine or time served or whatever something really basic is, that can seriously affect your status in Australia. And a criminal lawyer doesn't understand that it's not just a slap on the wrist for you. It could mean detention. It could mean being returned to your country. So in anything, whether it's a family law situation and it's divorce or DV, especially DV, if there is any hint of a visa, go and tell them to go and see an immigration lawyer, because it can be so detrimental to the rest of your life, even though it seems like a small issue for a family lawyer or a criminal lawyer. So no matter what area of law you're in, always consider that someone who's on a visa may not have the same rights and obligations as a citizen. And under that, they need to be considered a little differently. And that lawyer needs to have an understanding of their rights in this country. In regards to just, I think, I had another little, could you just say your question again, Hamida, because there was a more specific section I wanted to address there.
So it was just, what would you recommend to be the most important thing to remember when dealing with?
So the other thing is, like, so that's a general practitioner thing. So no matter what area of law you want to go into, like, keep that in mind. From a migration perspective, and I once I remember once I was sitting at my desk and I'd had this horrible day at the Department of Home Affairs, where my client got into a bit of trouble. And this lovely law clerk, volunteer law clerk, skipped into the office, and it was her last day. And she said, you know, thank you so much, Annie. I've loved working with you. Before I go, I wanted to know if you had one bit of advice for people doing, you know, immigration law, what would it be? And I looked up from my desk and I said, everybody lies. And my boss leaned out her window and she goes, Annie, was your one bit of advice, everybody lies? And I said, yes. And I don't mean it in this everybody's a bad person way. I mean it in this way where people say what they think you want to hear, and people twist their own truth so it doesn't even seem like a lie, but it's a little bit off center of the truth. And they do it because they think it's a better narrative. They think it's going to help them, and they think it's what you want to hear. But they don't know because you're the lawyer. So when you have a client, it's so important, even if you have this affinity with them and love them and trust them, it's really important to be thorough in your questioning. Build a really good rapport with them so they feel like they can be honest with you, and really, really second guess everything that they say with things that might seem obvious, like, is this person biological? Is your biological daughter? It's okay if she's not, you know, this is, we deal with situations of, you know, sexual violence and rape all the time. So if this is not a biological daughter of the father, that's okay. And then you never know what's going to come out. They'll be like, yes, it's my child, but it's not my husband's child. And you're like, okay, that is okay, but you have to be honest with me. And you know what, if it's bad, that's my job to clean it up and fix it. But people want to give you the best version of themselves. So it's so important to break down those barriers and question everything, because that's how you're going to be a really good immigration lawyer.
That helped a lot. Thank you so much, Annie.
You're welcome, Hamida.
Okay, well, I think we're right on the 1 hour mark. So if it's okay with everyone, I'd just like to close. I'd like to start out by thanking the USQ Law Society for promoting the event, and Francine. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Professor Young, who helped to arrange Annie's time. And then most of all, I would like to say on behalf of USQ and students, a very, very warm thank you to Annie. And it's just been amazing to hear all of your experiences and all of your advice. And I'm sure that students will probably be reaching out to you on LinkedIn, et cetera, to perhaps explore that networking that you spoke about as well.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Thanks so much for everyone that has kind of come along tonight. I know it's a weeknight and you've probably got Netflix to watch. So I really appreciate you all coming and asking your questions, which there were some great questions there, and just your interest in general is really exciting for me. So please reach out if you want to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks guys. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good night all.
Thank you, Annie.
Good night.